Welcome to WagerTalk TV. I am Kelly Stewart, joined by a couple of guys. You most notably know Ralph Michaels for his TNA segments on Bet On It. Ralph has access to a database to find us all sorts of those trends and angles. And John Ryan of SportsMemo.com and his predictive models. These two have teamed up to bring you an extended version of TNA for the divisional round of the playoffs. And of course, it wouldn't be TNA if we didn't start off with the nerd chart. Ralph, you have the floor.
Well, Kel, there's not much to take out of this except this. I mean, look at the experience of the quarterbacks in this playoff. Tom Brady, 46 playoff games. Joe Burrow, his second game, his first as a dog. We have the Tennessee quarterback Tannehill, the first game as a favorite. Garoppolo 1-1 as a dog. So you look at these situations. Mahomes stands out 6-3. He's been a favorite in every game. Josh Allen is 0-2 as a dog in the playoffs. So we'll see what comes of it. And last week we had the straight up ATS and net yards for teams versus playoff teams. The Packers, again, a perfect 6-0 against playoff teams this year, plus 350 yards. And what really is, to me, the AFC Championship game, look at Buffalo and KC, plus 502 yards and plus 498 yards. Those were the two top remaining playoff teams with a yards net diff against other playoff teams. So just a chart for you to look at with those quarterbacks and the experience we have. Tom Brady, by the way, 17-17-1 ATS as a favorite in the playoffs.
Yeah, but you can't bet against Tom Brady, right, Ralph? You know I love fading those narratives. And this week, everybody is talking about the rested teams. One would think, though, those top-seeded teams appear to have an advantage with that bye week. Does the data actually support that, though?
Well, let's remember, it's been different now because we used to have the top two seeds getting a bye. Now with the expanded playoffs, we only have the number one seed getting a bye. So when you look at the data for the last 10 years and the last 3 years, remember, for the majority of those years, there were multiple teams getting byes. So we'll see if the data holds true. Not much to share here. There's no real wow numbers, Kelly, but it's basically to show people that no, it has not been a huge advantage to have the bye. The last 10 years, the rested team versus a non-rested team has gone 27-7 straight up, but only 17-16-1 against the spread, just one game over 500. They have leaned to the over, going 20 overs and 14 unders. I will say this, the last 3 years, the rested teams like Green Bay and Tennessee have gone 9-1 straight up, 7-3 against the spread, and they have actually split the total with 5 overs and 5 unders.
Very interesting. John, welcome in. Another situation I've heard is regarding the better rushing team. Do these teams have an edge in the playoffs?
They sure do, Kelly. And actually, specifically, it's rushing attempts. It's not necessarily rushing yards per game. Rushing attempts actually brings more value and intelligence to the handicapping process than rushing yards per game. So in home playoff teams that average more rushing attempts than their opponent have gone on to a 35-16 straight up record, 29-21 against the number, and a 23-27 over under in all playoff games spanning the last 10 seasons. And there's a little bit more. If the home team averages fewer turnovers than the opponent that has the edge or the disadvantage in the average rushes per game, they have gone on to an 18-8 straight-up record, 16-9-1 against the number, and an even 13-13 over/under since 2012.
We started this video talking about rested versus non-rested teams, Ralph. How much do those numbers change based on the wildcard team having played at home versus on the road?
Kelly, great point, and it's going to surprise you. You would think a rested team playing a team that was on the road would do better than facing a team that was at home. So when you have a team playing back-to-back road games, like San Francisco is, the rested team has gone 17-2 straight up, but only 9-10 against the spread. So when a team is playing back-to-back road games, a wild card road game, and then a division road game, they have actually gone 10-9 ATS. When the rested team is playing a team that was at home last week, like Kansas City was against Buffalo, it's not a wow number, but the straight up record actually drops to 10-5 straight up, and the ATS number actually goes up to 8-6-1. But one thing I do want to point out, when a rested team, it's not a rested team like Tennessee. I said Kansas City, my mistake. When a rested team is playing a wild card team that was at home, like Tennessee and Cincinnati, the last 15 times that's occurred, we've had 12 overs and 3 unders. So when a team is playing back-to-back road games, the straight-up record is 17-2 for the rested team. When the team is playing back-to-back home games, the straight-up record for the rested team only 10-5, 67%. But the ATS record's the exact opposite of those numbers. So sort of an anomaly where there's closer games, but when those teams do win the game, they fail to cover.
All right, John, the Packers and Titans earned a first-round bye. How have teams fared in that situation?
Well, it depends on what happened the previous week. I took teams that had posted a -2 turnover margin, exactly -2. In other words, they had 2 more turnovers than their previous opponent did, and that being the last regular season game of the year. That is working against the Green Bay Packers. Not necessarily straight up because they're 8-3 in that situation, but 4-7 against the number. That's only 36 wins. And if the team lost their regular season final with a -2 turnover, they're 10-5 straight up, but only 5-10 against the number.
Ralph, the Bills and Chiefs matchups from last week kind of jumped out to me because teams combined 89 points last week. They put on absolute clinics against their opponents. It seems square, but who wants to back this under? But if you watch last week's video, you know that Ralph is going to make a case for it.
Well, let me say this. The database for the playoffs goes back over 20 years. This is the first time that both playoff teams have scored 40-plus points. So we're in a completely new category with the high-flying offense of the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs. But when I went back and looked at what teams did scoring 35 or more points, the over-under, 2 overs and 13 unders. So we have 2 playoff teams, each scored 35 or more points. They're matching up. In the 15 times that's occurred, it's gone 87% to the under. And I do want to mention, scoring 40 or more has actually been a negative long-term, but a positive short-term. This week, they cross each other out because both teams scored 40 points. But moving forward, do remember this. If a team scored 40 points or more, the next week, they've only gone 8-17 ATS. Now, we can say, wow, that's a 30% horrible ATS number. But this is one of those where we have to look at current form versus a long-term market. While teams that have scored 40 points or more have actually gone 8-17 ATS the next week, in the last 4 years, they've gone a perfect 4-0. So it's one of those, Cal, that when you're a handicapper, you can make a lot of trends and systems fit for your narrative. But it's important when you're using these to bet on, know what both the short-term results are and the long-term results as well.
Very great point, Ralph. John, a couple of teams last week with near perfect performances. How do playoff teams in the divisional round fare when having a turnover-free game the week prior?
Well, we know one thing for sure. Tommy Brady was one of those guys that had a near perfect performance. Not surprising. He's done it an awful lot in his career. So let's look at teams that have passed for 2 touchdowns exact and had no turnovers, no interceptions, no fumbles. And of course, like I said, we're looking at the Bucs this week, and the positive performance carries over, and it continues to carry over. And historically, with the Patriots and Tom Brady, you can see that they rarely did not follow through in the next game after having a tremendous performance. So teams in that role, 2 touchdowns exact, no turnovers, 8-4 straight up against the spread, 8-3-1 over under. But there's more. Now, if these home teams threw for 2 or more touchdowns, had no turnovers, they improved to 26-8 straight up, 20-13-1 against the number, and 18-15 over under over the last 20 years of playoff games. Supports the Tampa Bay Bucks.
All right, let's talk some momentum, Ralph. Tennessee is rested, and they won their 3 regular season games. Prior to that, does this team stay hot, or does that bye week hurt them?
Well, there's no real answer to that. So when we look at playoff teams that had a bye and won their last 3 games, we know the Packers lost their regular season finale and had their bye, as a lot of people rest starters. What happens with those teams that have a bye and have won those games? They're 17-8 straight up. So that percentage is actually lower than the other percentages of the playoff rested teams. And they're only 11-12 against the spread with 2 pushes. So it's a negative. But I took it one step further, Kel, and I took a subset. When they're not a double-digit favorite, so they're either a small dog or a single-digit dog, those rested teams off 3 straight wins become very overvalued. They are only 10-8 straight up. And listen to this, 5-11-2 against the spread. So when we talk about rest versus rust, if you are a single-digit favorite, it seems to be the rust category works.
And you've got a little data to support road teams off a big win. Can you go into more depth on that one?
Yeah, and this is a situation a couple teams find themselves in, actually. The one that I'm looking at right now is the Buffalo Bills, who beat the Patriots by 30 points. And I wanted to congratulate you on your best bet win last week, Kelly. As we know, I had a
Thank you. I needed 2 rocking chair winners. I got to the window with the Rams and the Bills. That makes me very apprehensive for this weekend, because that's not usually how friendly the NFL is to me. And now I'm going, okay, was I dead on, or did I just get a little lucky?
I think you were dead on, first of all. And teams that are in the playoffs that are coming off a game of 24 or more points in margin, meaning they won the game by that much, are 12-0 straight up, 13-9 against the number, but the over-under goes 7-15, which I'm really impressed, and that makes me think of a lean here with the Bills and the Chiefs on the under. But the fact that this is 12-0 straight up brings the question of whether they could pull off that big upset and continue their march through the playoffs. Now, playoff games where both teams are coming off double-digit wins, and the road team is priced as a dog of not more than 4.5 points. That's produced a 13-8 straight-up record, 14-6-1 for 70% winners, and the over-under has gone a little bit towards the under, but 9-12. So that definitely supports the Bills here. And the double-digit wins, Kansas City is also off a double-digit win. So you have both working there, but this favors the road team as a dog of 4.5 or fewer points.
I love to hear it, Ralph. Since we're on the topic of my best bet again for this week, let's go back to that Chiefs-Bills game. Both teams won by 21 plus last week. Any data to support either one of these teams?
Well, this is going to contradict exactly what John said. And the reason is we're here to teach you guys. We're not just here to give you wow numbers to try to slant you towards a side. John's numbers talked about how a team does when the road team wins by a big margin. At the end of his statement, however, he did say, and don't forget, though, the Chiefs also won by a big margin. So when I went and looked, since 2000, there have only been 6 times when both playoff teams were off wins of 20 points or more. The home team went 5-1 straight up, 4-2 ATS. Now, John's sample size is a lot bigger because he's looking at only the home team, but you do have to take this into consideration. Again, a very unique setting with both teams scoring that many points and both teams winning by that many. To get a larger data set, though, I looked at what happens when both teams win by 14 or more points. Well, the home team is 18-8 straight up, and only one game against above 500, going 13-12-1. So I'm not talking you out of what John said. I just want to remind you, if you're going to start doing technical handicapping, it's important not to cherry pick one data set without looking at the entire equation. And then after you've dissected all of it, figure out which way you're going to lean one way or the other because of those systems, trends, or angles.
Okay, John, please finish off the show by breaking down one game with your predictive model.
Yeah, the predictive models I use actually started back in 1995 when I was an institutional trader on Wall Street. And as I said last show, there's a lot of similarities between the sports betting markets and the financial trading markets. So these predictive models are not a black box. There's nothing special about them. There's no wizard hiding behind a curtain. But it does give me a feel for how a game could go. So if we look at the Buffalo versus Kansas City game, we see a line of 54.5 and the Bills being a 2-point dog now. So that implies what the market is telling us, not Vegas, what the market is telling us is a 28-26 type of game in which Kansas City wins. Okay, so do you think that perhaps Kansas City will score 28 or more? I do, and the models have an 82% probability that they will. That also means it has an 18% probability that they won't. But teams that are in the playoffs that are at home that score 28 or more points are 31-5 straight up, 25-9-2 against the number, 32-4 over under. So pretty strong results when you get to 28, and it's a pivot point. It also applies in college football. Teams that score more than 28 or don't, the results are vastly different. And the same thing here with teams that score 27 or fewer points in home games. They're just 28-29 straight up, 19-36 against the number, and the over-under is 10-46. So just changing it to 28 or more or 28 or fewer gives you vastly opposite results in these games. So I actually like the Chiefs. My heart wants the Bills to win. But the Chiefs, if they get to 28, it's in their favor. They probably cover the spread as well.
All right, John Ryan and I head-to-head this week. I love to see a little friendly competition. Appreciate all of you for hanging out with us today and watching all of our videos. Thank you to John and Ralph for all of their incredible data and information they bring. Make sure you're following both of them on Twitter at John Ryan Sports 1 and at Cal Sports LV.